My sister Stacy had the best personality of anybody I know. She was the life of the party. She just really wanted to have fun.
Funny is an understatement. She was there to make people smile and feel happy around her. She would do anything to make you laugh.
It looks like she has a doily on her head. This is the kind of stuff she did all the time. You see that smile? It's in every picture. It's contagious.
I felt like a sister to her. And because of her incredible family, they allowed me to feel like a sister.
Stacy's life dream was to have children and to be a mom.
It was almost a given that that was her life path. I mean, she was incredible with children.
Right after college, she was working in marketing.
Every job she had was for a fundraising organization. Anything to help the greater good and help people.
She did meet a guy that she ended up falling in love with and getting engaged to. He was a wonderful man, and as the wedding date got closer, it was clear that something wasn't right, and that wedding got canceled. Stacy was devastated. She thought that this was the love of her life. Her biological clock started ticking very, very early. This was not part of her plan. Her plan included being married before she was 30, having kids before she was 30, and it threw her for a loop. She needed to change the scenery. And wouldn't it be fun to move to Boston and take care of her niece? And she became our nanny. And it was magical. When I first met him, it was at our house. He was coming to pick her up for a date. He was very charming, very likable, and seemed to be enamored of her.
On paper, he looked great. He's a good-looking guy, well-educated. They made each other laugh. She had high hopes for a change. I think she really loved the idea. She met him at the right time in her life, so.
They went to Boston on their first date and drove around looking for a parking meter. And he had this little trick that will jimmy the parking meter so that you don't have to put money in it. And Stacy thought, wow, isn't that kind of cool? And I thought, I don't think that's cool at all. I think that's stealing. I didn't like that, and that was their very first date. He came from a Jewish family, a close family. His parents were divorced when he was a child, and he had promised her that divorce would never be in their future because of the trauma that it did to him. Stacy's heart was broken when her first engagement was broken, and she was guarded. and he was going to be her forever. He promised her that she would have everything she wanted. That she would be a stay-at-home mom, that he was going to provide for the family, that she wasn't going to have to work. I never knew how that was going to happen because he never really had a job. He was a bit of a scammer. He always had ways of scamming the system. One of the things he did while he was in Boston, I'll never forget this. He went to an electronics store and took the electronic out of the box, filled the box with heavy bricks, and returned the box, got his money back.
He did seem like a freeloader. I wasn't sure about his motivation to find something to support a family, so I was a little bit concerned.
Looking back on it, the red flags were there. One night I had invited Stacy and him to come out for dinner with us, and Stacy really wanted to come out with us, and he refused. He wanted to stay home and cook. I knew that what that meant for Stacy is that he would use every dish in the kitchen and then leave all the dishes for her because he never wanted to do dishes. Whatever he wanted, he got. Whatever he said, we all followed his rules. It wasn't about what Stacy wanted that night. It was really only about what he wanted.
They decided they would move to Denver, Colorado.
If he was to be her Prince Charming and give her what she wanted in a marriage, being a stay-at-home mom, Robert needed to have a job. We have lots of family in Denver. So Stacy thought, well, maybe he'll just come to Denver with me. My relatives will help him get a job and at least, he'll work, he'll have income. Stacy was so excited. She was really ready to move on to the next stage.
I think my gut told me he's not deserving yet to make this move with her and to be so immersed in her incredible family. And I was worried that if he did go with her, she was never coming back.
About a week before they were set to move, she and I went out for dinner together. And this is probably the one and only time I ever put myself out there like this with her. I said, "Are you sure you want him to come with you? You are moving to a new place. You have so many opportunities. Are you sure this is what you want?" And she said to me, and I will never forget it, she said, "Susan, he told me that he had a tough childhood and he had to take care of himself. And so he's number one in his book. He's always going to be number one." And I said, "Stacy, is that the kind of person that you want to marry?" And she said the typical, classic textbook response. "He will change for me." This is one of my greatest regrets. I think this is one of all of our greatest regrets, is that we didn't know what was happening. We didn't put it all together.
Denver 911.
What's your address?
Please help me!
They were moving in together. They were setting up the kitchen. They had a huge fight about where to place a garbage can.
He made it clear how he wanted things and how they were gonna be. Stacy had a mind of her own. She spoke back, but he wanted things a certain way. When he wanted something, he wanted them his way.
Stacy actually ended up leaving him and moving into my parents' house. Robert apologized and promised it won't happen again.
I was hopeful that this was it, but it was maybe a few days, and then they got back together.
Stacy was just too invested at that point and was looking for her happily ever after. When she told me that she was engaged, my heart dropped. While she was thrilled about her dreams coming true of getting married and having babies, my stomach sunk, my heart sunk. I wasn't happy for her. I pretended, I put on a show. I never shared my true feelings with her about her future. That's something that I regret to this day.
So it was a lovely wedding, and it coincided with the Oscar Awards that were broadcast around, it was around the same time. He had a really great speech. And he used the terms from the Oscar Awards. For example, producer, the director was his whatever. He would thank people and acknowledge them, the people in his life and his family, by giving them titles. And so we all assumed his leading lady, it was there. It was there for the taking, leading lady. It never happened. He never mentioned Stacy. It was devastating. It was embarrassing. She was mortified. Directly affected her, and that was, yeah, it was sad. It's a hard way to start.
Yep. See her crown? She wanted to be a princess. That's her wedding day. Do you notice her smile is not quite the same smile that we saw in earlier photos? I wonder about that.
They got married in March, so the following June they had their daughter. Beautiful girl, and within 2 years of that, they had their son.
Becoming a mom was her greatest joy, and she was the best mother ever. Stacy stopped working and started living a life that she always dreamt of.
His job was commission-based, so you really had to be motivated and work hard. He didn't. If he was home, I remember him sitting. That's the truth. I have visions of him just sitting on the couch in a bathrobe. He was never working.
Stacy eventually went back to work.
She got a great job again in nonprofit industry, and she was doing exceptionally well.
She did it because she needed to provide for her family. Her dream of being a stay-at-home mom was crushed.
We knew he was a lowlife and wasn't going to provide, but then there was this whole other chapter that started. A girlfriend and I went down to Denver to celebrate my birthday. And the day we got there, we needed to use her computer. So we went to their family computer. We sort of just moved the mouse. And we were immediately faced with the open page of a dating app.
Jan called me right away and said she saw a dating website and that Stacy's husband had a profile.
At first we were confused, and then we saw that there was correspondence, and whereas we were told that he had a meeting that night and he wasn't coming home for dinner, he in fact had a date that evening. I was shocked. I was scared. I didn't understand how it was open on their family computer, and I didn't know what to do. I was really upset. I was very upset. At that moment, we did nothing. We didn't tell her.
Neither of us knew what to do. We did nothing. If we had to do it over again, I would have done it differently.
What if she turned on us? What if she alienated us?
I talked to Stacy every evening after she put the kids to bed. And there was this one night that we were doing our daily call, and the doorbell rang. She wasn't expecting anyone, so she goes to the door. There's a woman there that she doesn't know. She said that she was looking for Stacy's husband. It turns out that it was somebody that he had met on a website, and she came to the door looking for him.
It came out that he was with her sexually. Stacy was shocked and surprised and disgusted. That's when chaos started.
Stacy confided in me that she had found out about her husband's affair. He claimed he needed to get this sex wherever he could find it. As miserable and sad as she was more forgiving than maybe she should have been. I talked to her about it, and she point blank said, "I don't want to be a single mom. I don't think our society is supportive of single moms." I think she felt shame in the situation that she was in. She didn't have any friends that were divorced. She insisted that they seek therapy. And he would start at her insistence, and he wouldn't finish. He wouldn't continue to go. There would always be an excuse. He didn't like the person. He didn't need the help.
He was making excuses for himself, but it was mean, it was hurtful. He told her that he needed her to lose weight so that he could be attracted to her again. How he spoke to her, it was shocking. He was rude, he was mean. I couldn't believe it. They tried every avenue. Nothing worked, nothing helped. and it didn't stop.
We talked about her leaving him. I talked to her about what she wanted to do about that. And we had made a plan that she was gonna leave. But he said to her, I will never divorce you. I will never let you divorce me because I am a product of a broken marriage, and I will not do that to my children. She was crying and crying and crying. And I was listening to her. I wasn't saying a lot, I was just listening to her. And I had this thought. And I said to myself, if she ends up dead, it's because he's gonna kill her.
I had been divorced for many years. I had used several online dating sites, didn't have a whole lot of success with anything, and I thought I would try something new and try the Tinder app. His profile picture, he had a big smile on his face, he was laughing, and he just looked like a very happy person. So that's what drew me to his photograph. And so I swiped right on Bob. We met for coffee. We talked about everything. He had told me he was just separated. He had been separated for 2 years and they were both seeing other people. I also opened up about my life. I told him about my divorce situation. We talked about our careers, about our kids, what we were looking for in terms of relationship. And we talked about what we like to do for fun. Both of us love to go antiquing and just hang out in the city or go to the mountains. Bob and I really seemed to click. On Thursday, we were planning to get together at a wine bar after work. It was blizzarding that night. It was a really snowy night. And he said, why don't I just come to you? That evening, I asked a lot of questions about his situation with his wife. He had explained to me that the reason that he separated from her was because she was an absentee mother. Bob had said, I'm always taking the kids skiing into the mountains and camping, and she's really not involved, and I didn't sign up for that. I thought, Bob must be a really dedicated father. We ended up sleeping together that night. I was feeling good about him. But 15 minutes later, he sat up in bed and said, I gotta go. I thought at that point, he's lying to me, he's married or something. From then, I started Googling Bob Wolf, and nothing came up. So at that point, I decided to do a reverse lookup on the phone number he gave me. I found a LinkedIn profile, and it had a big picture of him. It said Robert W. Feldman. I started Googling his wife at that point. And what I found was that she was the president of the PTO of the kids' grade school. So not only was she not an absentee mother, but she was a really dedicated mother who volunteered her time. I was really angry. Bob had disparaged her and lied to me. I felt she had the right to know. I wrote her an email and I said, Stacy, you don't know me, but I'm trying to find out if you and Bob are separated. If you're not, he's cheating on you. We slept together once and he blew me off after that. She wrote back at 8:30 and said, no, we are not separated. I'm done with him now. I've had it. I said, are you going to be okay? And she said, I have a really supportive family and lots of friends. I'll be fine. But I really do appreciate you reaching out. It was a good conversation. It was, I was feeling like I had done the right thing. I didn't know it could have such a devastating impact on so many people's lives.
Denver 911, what is the address?
Oh my God, I need help. Please help me. Please. What's your address? My wife's not breathing. I found her in the shower. Please. Please help me. I'm sending help out to you, sir. I'm going to give you some instructions, okay, before they get there. Are you with your wife now? Yes. Is she awake? No. I found her in the shower, please. Okay. Is she breathing? No, she's not. What do we do? Listen carefully and I'll tell you how to do a chest compression. Pump the chest hard and fast, at least twice per second in 2 inches deep. Count out loud so I can count with you. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Oh, please help me, please. Okay, help is on the way, sir. Keep pumping. You're doing good. Please. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11.
I screamed. I broke into tears. I sort of felt like I was up in the clouds looking in, and that this really wasn't happening.
I remember my 11-year-old daughter holding me while I was screaming. I don't remember much.
Stacy's husband told the detective that she wasn't feeling well and she didn't get out of bed that morning. And he took the children to school, and when he came home later in the afternoon is when he found her dead. They asked him if he wanted an autopsy done, and he said that we are Jewish and Jewish people don't do autopsies, and he did not want to have one done. But it is just customary that when a young person dies without a history of illness, that an autopsy has to be done. It's mandatory.
I had had another bad internet date, didn't go well. And I got home and I was just lying in bed on my phone and I thought, I wonder if they got divorced. So I Googled and her obituary came up pretty much immediately. Oh, my stomach just turned. I looked at the date of her death, and I realized that that was around the time I spoke to her. And so I went and looked at my email to her, and I realized it was the same day. I couldn't believe it. I looked up the number for Denver Homicide, and they were very interested in what I had to say. I told him the whole story. He told me in the interview that the medical examiner had ruled her death undetermined. They were continuing to follow leads. I'm a researcher, and when the detective told me that the cause of death was undetermined, I wanted to see it for myself. I left the detective's office and I went to the medical examiner's office and I got a copy of the autopsy. I read the details, and it said she had bruising about her head and upper body. She was found with her tongue clenched between her teeth. I knew from reading it that something very wrong had happened.
I wanted to closely examine the evidence, looking for clues that may have been not appreciated or missed as part of the initial investigation. Robert Feldman told the police that he came home and found his wife naked in the shower. Didn't know whether she had drowned, fallen, had a heart attack. He didn't know. The detectives and the first responders felt there was something unusual about his demeanor.
Are you with your wife now?
Yes.
Is she awake?
No.
I listened to the 911 call. He sounded over hysterical, very dramatic.
Please, baby, please.
Being found dead in the bathtub is highly suspicious of a stage scene. When I looked at the location of Stacy's injuries, it was not what you would expect to see from a fall in a bathtub. Too many, way too many. There were, we call them pattern imprints, pattern abrasions, which tells me that when those injuries were sustained, she was clothed. Yet, she is found naked in the bathtub. When I analyzed the photographs from the bathroom, I saw an imprint of some sort. That is what you expect to see with the sole of a shoe. Why would your boots be inside of the bathtub? The only reason is if you were trying to pull someone into the tub. She had injuries to her eyes from increased pressure that you see during strangulation, more than 50 in each eye. She had bruises on the arms, consistent with her arms being held down while she's being assaulted. This was, in fact, death from strangulation or suffocation. It was clear to me that one, this was a staged crime scene, and two, that Stacy Feldman had been murdered.
I walked up on the witness stand. They asked me to identify Bob, and I pointed straight at him. I said, "He's right there." And I looked him right in the eye, and he just stared at me, a very blank stare. There was no emotion, no nothing.
Prosecutor said Stacy confronted him about the latest affair and told him that she's done and the marriage is over. It's one thing to react and get upset, but there's that piece, that evil piece, that allowed him to hurt her the way he did and kill her.
Dr. Smock pointed out every single mark that she had on her body. And he pointed out that it was a violent death and that she fought back. And all I could think about that whole time is, what is Stacy thinking? Is she thinking about me? Is she thinking that she's gonna die? Is she thinking about her kids? I had no idea how I managed those 7 years between him killing her and hit the verdict, because of delays that his lawyer was able to get for him, because of financial delays, because of COVID. We had years of being in limbo. Every time we thought we were going to get close, we would get our hopes up and think that it was going to come to an end, and then we would be crushed again. After the verdict, we were shocked, we were stunned, we were speechless. We were elated. I felt free. I felt that I could breathe again. The fog was lifted.
I am very grateful that Susan McBride came forward. It put the pieces together to make it make sense.
Susan McBride is my hero. What she did, how she came forward, I will forever be indebted to her and grateful.
This whole situation and my involvement with Robert Feldman really made me take a hard look at my life. I needed a change. So I moved to an area of northern Tuscany called Lunigiana in Italy. I wanted to live a simpler life in a quieter place where, knock on wood, these kinds of things don't happen so much. A place to really think and, plan the next chapter of my life.
I can't even tell you how many times a day I think about Stacy, how many times a day I want to pick up the phone and call her. I'm not whole without her. It's such a hole in my heart, in so many people's hearts.
I hear her. Sounds weird, but she had a very distinct laugh. I hear it a lot. I'm sorry. I'm sorry there wasn't more we could do or didn't know what to do. I don't know what we would have done or could have done, but I miss her tremendously.
Under the quiet California sky, where the Pacific rolled onto the sand with the same rhythm it had followed for centuries, evil arrived without announcing its face. It did not burst through a door, or leave behind a dramatic trail of destruction. Instead, it picked up a telephone. A calm voice traveled through a police switchboard and delivered a chilling promise. Somewhere in Oceanside, something was going to happen. Something that would never be solved. The words were strange enough to be remembered, yet ordinary enough to be dismissed. Police officers had heard prank calls before. Anonymous threats were part of the job, little interruptions in otherwise predictable shifts. Nobody knew they had just listened to the opening sentence of a mystery that would survive generations. Less than 48 hours later, the prediction became reality. A taxi driver disappeared into the darkness, with a passenger no one could identify. His final radio transmission sounded routine, almost comforting in its normality. There was no panic in his voice. No hesitation. No desperate request for help. He simply reported his destination and continued driving into the night, believing he was transporting another customer like the hundreds before. Somewhere along that short journey, an ordinary shift became a death sentence. By sunrise, Ray Davis was dead. His body lay inside his taxi, abandoned near the quiet coastline, where the ocean breeze carried the scent of salt and wet sand. His wallet remained untouched. His watch was still on his wrist. Cash had not been stolen. The cab itself had not been taken. Whoever had pulled the trigger had not come for money. The victim had not been robbed of his possessions. He had been robbed of his future. For detectives, that detail changed everything. Most murders begin with a question of motive. A jealous lover. A business dispute. A robbery gone wrong. An argument that spiraled into violence. Investigators instinctively search for the reason, because people usually kill for something. Money. Revenge. Fear. Passion. Survival. But in the case of Ray Davis, every familiar explanation seemed to dissolve under closer inspection. The crime scene offered almost nothing that made emotional or logical sense. It was as though the killer had erased the most important answer before disappearing forever. Then the telephone rang again. The same cold confidence returned through the receiver. The anonymous caller reminded police about the earlier warning before calmly claiming responsibility for killing the taxi driver. As if that confession were not disturbing enough, another threat followed. The caller announced that a bus driver would be next. Fear spread through Oceanside faster than any official announcement ever could. School buses suddenly seemed vulnerable. Public transportation became a place where strangers eyed one another with quiet suspicion. Drivers who had spent years greeting passengers with casual smiles now wondered whether the next customer climbing aboard might be carrying a gun beneath a jacket. Parents hesitated before letting children travel alone. Officers rode buses with loaded weapons. Military police from nearby Camp Pendleton joined local authorities in patrols. An invisible enemy had transformed an ordinary coastal town into a community waiting for another shot to be fired. But no second attack came. The threat lingered like a storm cloud that refused to move. Days passed. Weeks followed. Eventually, life resumed its familiar pace, yet nothing truly returned to normal. The murder remained unsolved. The caller vanished. Every lead grew colder, until the investigation settled into the quiet shelves reserved for cases that refused to surrender their secrets. Decades slipped away. Children who had been too young to remember the headlines became grandparents. Police chiefs retired. Detectives passed away. Technology advanced beyond anything investigators in 1962 could have imagined. Fingerprints could now be scanned instantly. DNA transformed criminal investigations around the world. Computers connected evidence separated by thousands of miles. Yet one name remained stubbornly trapped in uncertainty. Ray Davis. A man whose final passenger has never been identified. A killer whose face has never been confirmed. A mystery that somehow became even more unsettling with time. Because the story refused to stay buried. Years later, researchers studying another infamous criminal began noticing eerie similarities between this forgotten California murder and a series of killings that would terrorize Northern California in the late 1960s. The similarities were impossible to ignore. A murderer who contacted police. A seemingly random victim. A taxi driver executed without robbery. A desire to create fear beyond the crime itself. A predator who appeared to enjoy demonstrating superiority over investigators. One name emerged again and again. The Zodiac Killer. To this day, no official investigation has confirmed that Ray Davis was one of Zodiac's victims. There is no definitive forensic evidence connecting the two cases. No letter written in the Zodiac's unmistakable style ever mentioned Oceanside. No fingerprint has bridged the gap between speculation and proof. Yet the possibility continues to haunt both professional investigators and amateur researchers alike. If the connection were ever established, it would shift the timeline of one of America's most notorious serial murder cases by several years. Or perhaps it would reveal something even more frightening. Perhaps Ray Davis was not the first victim of Zodiac. Perhaps he was the victim of someone history has never managed to identify. That possibility opens another terrifying door. How many killers have passed unnoticed through ordinary towns? How many crimes have quietly disappeared beneath the weight of time, because science had not yet caught up with violence? How many murderers lived normal lives after committing acts that newspapers reported for only a few weeks before moving on to newer tragedies? Cold cases carry a unique kind of horror. Unlike solved crimes, they deny closure not only to families, but also to history itself. Every unanswered question continues existing in the present tense. Every unidentified suspect remains a possibility. Every forgotten witness becomes a lost opportunity. Time does not simply pass. It slowly erodes evidence while strengthening mystery. The Ray Davis case represents exactly that kind of unfinished story. It is not remembered because it was the bloodiest murder in California. It was not the deadliest attack, or the largest criminal investigation in American history. Instead, it survives because it leaves behind a haunting silence where answers should have been. The evidence exists, yet it refuses to speak clearly. The killer acted boldly enough to telephone police before and after the murder, yet somehow disappeared without leaving behind an identity. Confidence and invisibility rarely exist together, but in this case they became inseparable. Imagine sitting behind the steering wheel of a taxi on a cool April night in 1962. Streetlights reflect softly against the windshield. Neon signs flicker outside small restaurants preparing to close for the evening. The distant sound of waves blends with the low hum of the engine. A passenger enters the back seat. Nothing feels unusual. No alarm sounds inside your mind. You ask for the destination. You pull away from the curb. The city continues breathing around you, unaware that your final journey has already begun. Somewhere behind you sits a stranger whose intentions remain hidden. A few casual turns through familiar streets. A brief conversation, perhaps. Or maybe complete silence. Then, in an instant, everything changes forever. No witnesses step forward. No surviving victim tells the story. No confession leads to an arrest. Only an abandoned cab, 2 gunshots, and a voice carried through a telephone line remain to tell investigators that someone had planned this crime long before the trigger was ever pulled. That is where our story begins. Not with certainty, but with absence. Not with answers, but with echoes. This is the story of a quiet town that discovered fear through an anonymous voice, of a hard-working taxi driver whose final passenger vanished into history, and of a murder so enigmatic that more than 60 years later, investigators, historians, journalists, and true crime researchers continue searching for the same elusive truth. Who killed Ray Davis? And perhaps even more chilling, why did the killer want the world to know the crime would happen before it ever did? April 1962 arrived in Southern California with the kind of quiet confidence that made people believe tomorrow would look exactly like today. The mornings began beneath pale blue skies, the afternoons carried the warmth of spring, and by evening the cool air drifting inland from the Pacific Ocean settled gently over the streets of Oceanside. It was a place where routine shaped daily life. Fishermen prepared their boats before sunrise. Military convoys rolled in and out of nearby Camp Pendleton with practiced precision. Children rode bicycles down peaceful neighborhoods, their laughter echoing between modest homes. Shop owners greeted familiar faces by first name, and strangers rarely remained strangers for long. To outsiders, Oceanside was simply another small coastal city in California. To the people who lived there, it was something more intimate. It was a community built upon predictability. The city was home to fewer than 25,000 residents. That number was small enough for rumors to spread before the local newspaper reached every doorstep. Families gathered on front porches during warm evenings, exchanging stories while the smell of barbecue drifted through the streets. Churches filled on Sunday mornings. Local diners served the same customers every week. Hardware stores, pharmacies, and grocery markets operated with a familiarity that larger cities had long since forgotten. Violent crime was not completely absent, but murder remained exceptionally rare. When disagreements occurred, they usually ended with harsh words rather than gunfire. Police officers often recognized the people they encountered during patrols. Many of the calls they answered involved missing bicycles, neighborhood disputes, or minor traffic accidents rather than homicide investigations. That sense of security shaped the way people thought. Doors were not always locked. Children wandered farther from home than modern parents would ever allow. Taxi drivers accepted late-night fares without assuming every passenger might become a threat. Fear belonged somewhere else. Perhaps Los Angeles. Perhaps San Francisco. Certainly not Oceanside. Yet appearances can be deceptive. Only a few miles north of downtown stood Camp Pendleton, one of the largest Marine Corps bases in the United States. The installation brought thousands of young servicemen through the region every year. Uniformed Marines filled restaurants, movie theaters, bars, and beaches whenever they were off duty. Their presence supported local businesses and contributed significantly to the town's economy, but it also meant that Oceanside welcomed a constantly changing population. New faces appeared every week. Some stayed for months. Others disappeared after only a few days. In hindsight, investigators would later recognize how difficult that made identifying an unknown suspect. A stranger arriving in Oceanside in 1962 attracted very little attention. Travelers came and went constantly. Someone could spend a night in town, commit a crime, and leave before sunrise without anyone remembering their face. But no one thought about such possibilities in April of that year. Life continued at its comfortable pace. Mission Avenue formed one of the city's busiest corridors, connecting businesses, restaurants, service stations, and transportation routes. During daylight hours, delivery trucks rumbled through intersections while customers moved between shops carrying paper bags filled with groceries or freshly purchased clothing. Neon signs blinked to life after sunset, casting colorful reflections across polished automobile hoods parked along the curb. As darkness settled over Oceanside each evening, another rhythm quietly took over. Restaurants closed one by one. Families returned home. The sidewalks emptied. Yet some people were only beginning their workday. Taxi drivers became the invisible thread connecting the city's nightlife. They transported sailors returning from local bars, elderly residents unable to drive after dark, couples leaving dinner dates, travelers arriving by train, and workers finishing late shifts. Their job demanded patience more than excitement. Most fares lasted only a few minutes. Some passengers preferred conversation, while others stared silently through the windows, lost in private thoughts. A taxi driver never truly knew who might open the rear door next. Most nights, that uncertainty was harmless. Sometimes it even brought unexpected moments of kindness. People celebrated birthdays inside cabs. Young couples shared exciting news about engagements. Parents hurried toward hospitals after labor pains began. Visitors asked for recommendations about the best seafood restaurant near the beach. Drivers became temporary companions, sharing brief fragments of other people's lives before returning to the steady flow of waiting customers. Checker Cab Company operated within that ordinary world. Its drivers were not celebrities. They did not appear in newspaper headlines. Their names rarely reached public attention unless someone accidentally left luggage behind or praised exceptional service. Success in the taxi business depended upon consistency. Showing up on time. Knowing every shortcut through town. Treating customers respectfully. Working long hours while others relaxed at home. It was demanding work that often went unnoticed. Yet it carried an unspoken risk. Every shift required placing trust in complete strangers. Unlike store owners protected by counters or office workers surrounded by colleagues, taxi drivers spent countless hours alone inside enclosed vehicles with people whose intentions remained impossible to predict. Most passengers climbed into the back seat carrying nothing more dangerous than shopping bags or briefcases. Occasionally, however, someone entered carrying darker intentions hidden beneath an ordinary appearance. In 1962, few drivers obsessed over that possibility. America still possessed a certain innocence regarding random acts of violence. Serial killers had not yet become household names. The phrase stranger danger had not entered everyday vocabulary. People generally believed that if they treated others with decency, decency would be returned. It was an imperfect belief. But it was sincerely held. Police work reflected that same era. The Oceanside Police Department consisted of a relatively small force, whose officers balanced professionalism with familiarity. Patrolmen knew local business owners personally. They recognized repeat troublemakers without consulting photographs. Detectives handled investigations using methods that now seem almost impossibly limited. There were no mobile computers waiting inside patrol cars. No surveillance cameras documenting street corners. No GPS records tracing vehicle movements. No DNA databases capable of identifying microscopic evidence decades later. Investigators relied upon notebooks, telephone calls, eyewitness memory, physical evidence examined through techniques that represented the best science available at the time, yet would later appear primitive compared to modern forensic standards. A fingerprint discovered at a crime scene remained valuable only if police already possessed someone else's matching print for comparison. Otherwise, it became little more than an unanswered question preserved on paper. Every investigation depended heavily upon human observation. Someone seeing the wrong car. Someone remembering an unfamiliar face. Someone noticing behavior that felt slightly unusual. Without witnesses, many cases reached frustrating dead ends. No one in the department imagined how painfully important those limitations would soon become. Beyond police headquarters, everyday life continued peacefully. Children attended school without armed security officers. Movie theaters advertised the latest Hollywood productions beneath brightly illuminated marquees. Beachgoers gathered along the shoreline despite the cool spring water, watching surfers challenge rolling Pacific waves. Local newspapers focused more attention on civic events and community celebrations than violent crime. Headlines discussed city planning, sports, military activities, and neighborhood developments. Homicide investigations rarely demanded front-page coverage because there were so few to report. Residents trusted their community. Perhaps they trusted it too much. History has a peculiar habit of identifying moments that seemed completely ordinary before everything changed. A quiet breakfast. A routine drive to work. A familiar conversation. An unnoticed telephone call. Only afterward do people realize they were standing on the edge of something irreversible. April 1962 represented exactly that kind of moment. Across America, the nation stood between two very different eras. The optimism of the post-war years still lingered, but beneath the surface, social tensions, political uncertainty, and cultural transformation quietly gathered strength. The country would soon experience events that reshaped its identity forever, yet in Oceanside those larger historical currents felt distant. People focused on immediate concerns. Paying bills. Raising families. Working overtime. Planning summer vacations. Watching the sunset over the Pacific Ocean. The future appeared reassuringly ordinary. No one could have imagined that decades later, historians, journalists, retired detectives, and amateur researchers would repeatedly return to this small town searching for answers buried somewhere within those peaceful streets. No one suspected that a single unsolved murder would become woven into discussions surrounding one of America's most infamous unidentified killers. No one knew that Oceanside was about to lose its innocence. The transformation would not happen through a spectacular act of chaos. There would be no high-speed chase through crowded streets. No bank robbery. No public massacre. Instead, it would begin quietly. A telephone would ring. A dispatcher would answer. A calm voice would speak. And because the words sounded so impossible, because they arrived without visible evidence or immediate danger, the warning would fade into the background of another ordinary workday. Sometimes history does not announce itself with explosions. Sometimes it whispers. And the people who hear the whisper only understand its meaning after someone has died. Among the countless people who moved through Oceanside each day, there was nothing about Ray Davis that suggested he would one day become part of one of California's most enduring unsolved mysteries. He was not a politician, a celebrity, or a wealthy businessman whose disappearance would dominate national headlines overnight. He was a working man. The kind of man communities quietly depend on every day without giving much thought to his existence. His life followed a rhythm that millions of Americans understood well: work hard, treat people with respect, earn an honest living, and return home after another long shift. Those who knew him rarely described him with dramatic words. No one remembered explosive arguments or reckless behavior. Friends and co-workers spoke about him in the language reserved for dependable people. He was polite, reliable, calm under pressure. He arrived when he said he would. He completed his shifts without complaint. If another driver needed help, Ray was the sort of colleague who would lend a hand before being asked. In many ways, that ordinary reputation makes his story even more haunting. Violent crimes often tempt people to search for hidden secrets inside a victim's past. Investigators ask whether someone owed money, whether there was a troubled relationship, whether old grudges had quietly grown into deadly hatred. Sometimes those questions uncover motives hidden beneath seemingly normal lives. In Ray Davis's case, they found almost nothing. No evidence suggested he was involved with organized crime. No reports described dangerous enemies waiting for revenge. No family disputes hinted at escalating violence. No co-workers remembered threats from angry customers. His life appeared remarkably uncomplicated. That simplicity frustrated detectives, almost as much as it saddened those who knew him. Every ordinary detail seemed to remove another possible explanation. Ray worked for Checker Cab Company, a business that served residents, visitors, and military personnel throughout Oceanside. Taxi driving demanded more than simply knowing how to operate a car. Every shift required patience, awareness, and the ability to judge people quickly without appearing judgmental. Drivers spent hours navigating unfamiliar conversations with complete strangers. Some passengers wanted silence. Others eagerly shared stories about their families, careers, or travels. A good driver understood when to listen and when to leave someone alone with their thoughts. Co-workers remembered Ray as exactly that kind of professional. He treated customers respectfully regardless of who they were. Late-night fares never seemed to bother him. While some drivers complained about difficult passengers or long hours, Ray accepted the realities of the job with quiet professionalism. Night shifts often paid better than daytime work, and someone had to keep the city moving after most businesses closed. There was always another customer needing a ride. A Marine returning to base. A waitress finishing her shift. A traveler arriving on a late train. Someone leaving a friend's house long after buses had stopped running. To Ray, each passenger represented another routine trip. Nothing more. Nothing less. Taxi drivers develop a unique understanding of human nature. They witness people during private moments rarely seen by outsiders. Excitement after a promotion. Grief following a funeral. Relief after leaving a hospital. Anxiety before an important meeting. Every fare carried its own emotional atmosphere. Most drivers learn to recognize trouble. The intoxicated customer looking for an argument. The impatient businessman demanding impossible shortcuts. The nervous passenger constantly checking behind them. Experience teaches caution. Yet experience also creates confidence. After hundreds or even thousands of uneventful trips, danger begins to feel like something that happens elsewhere. Ray had likely transported every kind of passenger imaginable. Young couples laughing after dates. Families carrying sleepy children. Tourists asking about nearby beaches. Service members discussing assignments. Ordinary people living ordinary lives. That routine may have become his greatest vulnerability. There is no evidence suggesting Ray expected trouble during his final shift. Nothing indicates he reported suspicious behavior earlier that evening. No emergency calls. No unusual conversations with dispatch. No comments to fellow drivers expressing concern. Everything known about his last hours points toward another completely normal night. Perhaps that is the cruelest aspect of random violence. It offers no warning recognizable until it is too late. Outside of work, the historical record reveals surprisingly little about Ray Davis's private life. That absence is not unusual for victims whose murders occurred before the digital age. There were no social media profiles preserving everyday moments. No endless collection of photographs documenting ordinary weekends. No online messages revealing casual conversations. Instead, fragments survive through newspaper reports, police files, and the memories of people who knew him. Those fragments paint the portrait of a man defined less by extraordinary achievements than by consistent decency. Sometimes history remembers people because of remarkable accomplishments. Other times, it remembers them because unimaginable tragedy interrupted lives that otherwise would have passed quietly into old age. Ray belonged to the second category. His name survives because someone decided his life should end inside a taxi cab on an April night. As investigators later reconstructed his schedule, nothing stood out as unusual. He reported for work as expected. He prepared his cab. Like every professional driver, he likely performed the routine checks that became second nature over years behind the wheel. Fuel, tires, lights, radio equipment. Everything needed to complete another shift safely. There is something deeply human about routines. They create the comforting illusion that tomorrow will resemble yesterday. When Ray climbed into his cab that evening, he almost certainly expected to finish work the same way he always had. Drive. Pick up passengers. Collect fares. Return the vehicle. Go home. Perhaps he had already begun thinking about the following day. Perhaps there were errands waiting. Friends to meet. Family to visit. Simple plans that would never happen. The tragedy of unsolved murders often lies not only in what is known, but in everything forever lost. We know approximately when Ray accepted his final passenger. We know roughly where his journey began. We know where investigators eventually found him. What we do not know fills a far larger space. Did he exchange friendly conversation with the passenger before the shooting? Did the customer appear calm? Did anything seem unusual about the destination requested? Was there a moment when instinct warned him something was wrong? Or did death arrive so suddenly that he never had the opportunity to react? Those answers disappeared with the killer. Every detective who later studied the case faced the same painful limitation. The only surviving witness capable of describing the final minutes no longer had a voice. Taxi drivers occupy an unusual place in society. For brief periods, they become trusted companions to complete strangers. Customers climb into enclosed vehicles, often late at night, placing their safety in the hands of someone they have never met. At the same time, drivers trust passengers not to exploit that vulnerability. It is an unspoken agreement. Mutual confidence between strangers. Most of the time, that trust is rewarded. On the night of April 10, 1962, it was betrayed. Perhaps Ray glanced into the rearview mirror several times during the drive, as drivers naturally do. Perhaps he noticed nothing remarkable. A passenger looking out the window. Hands resting quietly. No sudden movements. No visible weapon. The roads through Oceanside would have felt familiar. He had likely driven them hundreds of times before. Every intersection, every traffic signal, every turn toward South Oceanside existed comfortably within his memory. Familiar streets have a way of lowering our guard. When danger appears in unfamiliar places, people react quickly. When it appears somewhere ordinary, the mind struggles to recognize it. Investigators later examined every aspect of Ray's professional life, searching for overlooked connections. They questioned co-workers about difficult customers. They reviewed previous incidents involving taxi drivers. They asked whether anyone had displayed unusual interest in Ray specifically. Nothing meaningful emerged. No obsessed passenger. No angry acquaintance. No threatening telephone calls directed at him. The absence of personal motive gradually pushed detectives toward a disturbing possibility. Maybe Ray himself had never been the intended target. Maybe any taxi driver working that shift would have suffered the same fate. If true, That possibility transformed the murder from a personal crime into something colder. Far colder. It suggested a victim selected not because of who he was, but because of what he represented. A taxi. An opportunity. A random human being performing an ordinary job. That theory became even more unsettling after investigators considered the anonymous telephone calls received before and after the murder. The language used by the caller focused not on Ray Davis as an individual, but on the act itself. The crime appeared designed to demonstrate power over the police rather than settle any personal grievance. If that interpretation is correct, Ray's greatest misfortune was simply being the driver who answered one final request for a ride. History sometimes reduces victims to names attached to investigations. Files. Evidence. Autopsy reports. Timelines. But before becoming a cold case, Ray Davis was a living person who woke each morning expecting another ordinary day. He laughed at jokes, felt tired after long shifts, trusted strangers enough to welcome them into the back seat of his cab. Those ordinary qualities deserve remembrance. Because behind every famous unsolved mystery stands an individual whose future was stolen. Not an abstract case file. Not merely a headline. A human life interrupted without explanation. As evening slowly approached on April 10th, nothing separated that day from countless others that had come before it. The Pacific continued rolling onto the shore. Neon lights flickered awake across Oceanside. Checker cab drivers prepared for another busy night. Ray Davis did the same. He could not know that somewhere within the city, another man may already have chosen his victim. Or perhaps had chosen only the profession. A taxi driver. Any taxi driver. Someone whose disappearance would allow a killer to prove that promises made over the telephone could become horrifying reality. Within a matter of hours, Ray's name would pass from dispatch radios to police reports, from newspaper headlines to the archives of one of California's oldest unsolved murders. His final shift had already begun. Neither he nor anyone else in Oceanside understood that they were only minutes away from stepping into a mystery that would remain unanswered for more than 6 decades. Night settled over Oceanside with quiet confidence on April 10, 1962. The last traces of daylight disappeared beyond the Pacific horizon, leaving the town wrapped in the familiar glow of streetlights, storefront signs, and headlights moving steadily through the coastal streets. It was neither stormy nor unusually cold. There was nothing about the weather that hinted history was preparing to take a dark turn. The ocean continued its endless conversation with the shoreline, waves breaking against the sand with the same rhythm they had followed long before anyone built roads or houses nearby. Inside restaurants, the dinner crowds had begun to thin. The laughter drifting from neighborhood bars grew louder as the evening progressed. Marines stationed at Camp Pendleton relaxed after another day of training. Couples lingered over late meals. A few moviegoers stepped onto sidewalks discussing the films they had just watched. Others hurried toward home before midnight. For most residents, it was another ordinary Tuesday. For Ray Davis, it was another shift behind the wheel. His checker cab moved through Oceanside's streets exactly as it had countless nights before. The engine hummed steadily beneath the hood. The radio connected him with dispatch. Streetlights reflected across the windshield as he traveled between pickup locations. Every mile added another small fare, another brief encounter with someone whose life intersected with his for only a few minutes. Taxi driving rewarded patience. There were long periods of waiting interrupted by moments of activity. Drivers learned to observe people without staring, to listen without asking unnecessary questions, and to navigate conversations that often ended the moment a passenger stepped onto the sidewalk. Nothing in the surviving records suggests Ray experienced anything unusual during the early part of that evening. No reports of aggressive customers. No arguments over fares. No mechanical problems with the cab. Everything appears to have unfolded according to routine. It is impossible to know exactly what occupied his thoughts as the hours passed. Perhaps he was calculating how much he had earned so far. Perhaps he wondered whether business would improve before the shift ended. Perhaps he was simply concentrating on the road ahead, anticipating the next dispatch call. Ordinary moments rarely leave historical records. Then, sometime around 11:10 p.m., another passenger entered his life. The pickup took place near the taxi stand on Mission Avenue, one of Oceanside's busiest streets. Mission Avenue remained active even late into the evening. Restaurants, small businesses, and entertainment venues attracted both local residents and visitors. It was an entirely believable place for someone to request transportation. To Ray, the customer likely appeared no different from dozens of others he had served that week. A destination was requested. The rear door closed. The journey began. No surviving witness can tell us exactly what that passenger looked like. No confirmed description exists. No reliable account explains the person's clothing, age, voice, or mannerisms. The final customer, who climbed into Ray Davis's taxi, remains one of the greatest unidentified figures in California criminal history. As the cab pulled away from Mission Avenue, Ray followed standard procedure. He contacted dispatch by radio. His message was short, professional, routine. He reported that he was transporting a passenger toward South Oceanside. There was no urgency in his voice. No hesitation. No coded request for assistance. Nothing that suggested danger had entered the vehicle. Dispatch acknowledged the transmission, just as they had acknowledged countless others before it. Neither side realized those few ordinary words would become the final recorded communication from Ray Davis. The radio fell silent. Somewhere between Mission Avenue and South Oceanside, the atmosphere inside the cab changed forever. Investigators have spent decades trying to reconstruct those missing minutes. The route itself was not especially long. Depending upon the exact destination, the drive would have carried the taxi away from the busier commercial district toward quieter residential and coastal areas. Traffic late at night was relatively light. There were stretches of road where another vehicle might not appear for several minutes. That isolation may have offered the killer exactly what was needed. Privacy. Opportunity. Time. What happened inside the cab can only be inferred from physical evidence discovered later. At some point during the journey, the passenger produced a firearm. Whether the weapon had remained concealed beneath a jacket, inside a pocket, or elsewhere cannot be known. There is no indication that Ray realized what was happening until it was already too late. The first shot came from behind. The bullet traveled through the driver's seat before striking Ray. That single detail tells investigators something important. The attack almost certainly began without warning. A victim expecting violence might instinctively turn, brake suddenly, or attempt to escape. Instead, the trajectory suggests Ray remained facing forward, focused on driving, when the trigger was first pulled. The shooter possessed complete surprise. Imagine the silence inside that moving vehicle only seconds earlier. The steady vibration of the engine. The tires rolling across pavement. Perhaps the faint sound of a radio station playing in the background. Then an explosion inside the confined space. A deafening blast. Glass trembling. Smoke filling the air. Pain arriving before understanding. What happened next remains uncertain. Some investigators believe the first shot may not have killed Ray immediately. The cab appears to have continued moving for at least a short distance. Whether Ray attempted to maintain control despite his injuries, or whether the passenger directed the vehicle afterward remains unknown. Eventually, the taxi reached the secluded St. Malo area near the beach. Unlike the more active parts of Oceanside, this neighborhood offered darkness and relative isolation late at night. Expensive beachfront homes stood separated from one another, and after midnight, pedestrian traffic was minimal. If someone intended to complete a murder without interruption, it was a practical location. Here, according to the evidence, the killer delivered a second shot. This one was fired at close range into Ray's head. Execution style: deliberate. Final. There was no struggle recorded at the scene. No evidence of a prolonged fight. No indication that multiple attackers participated. The murder unfolded with chilling efficiency. Afterward, the killer climbed out of the cab. And then nothing. No confirmed witness observed a suspicious figure walking away. No nearby resident reported hearing screams. No passing motorist contacted police after noticing unusual activity. The darkness swallowed the murderer completely. The taxi itself would later be discovered some distance from where Ray's body was found, bearing additional evidence of gunfire, including damage to the windshield. Investigators debated exactly when that damage occurred and whether it formed part of the original attack or resulted from subsequent events. Like so many aspects of the case, certainty proved elusive. Yet one fact became immediately obvious. Robbery had never been the objective. Ray's wallet remained where it should have been. Money had not disappeared. His wristwatch still rested on his arm. The cab had not been stolen. For detectives arriving later, those untouched possessions spoke almost as loudly as the gunshots themselves. Most criminals willing to kill during a robbery seize valuables before fleeing. Even inexperienced offenders rarely abandon cash lying directly before them. Here, everything remained. The killer had ignored opportunities that would have benefited an ordinary thief. Instead, the crime scene suggested a far more disturbing motive. The murder itself had been the purpose. Nothing else. That realization transformed the investigation from relatively straightforward to profoundly complex. If money was not the answer, what was? Hatred. There was no evidence Ray knew his attacker. Revenge. No known conflict pointed toward such violence. Random impulse. Perhaps. But random killers rarely telephone police before committing murder. Planning. Almost certainly. Yet planning toward what end? Those questions would soon consume investigators. Meanwhile, somewhere beyond the crime scene, the killer disappeared into the California night. Did he walk calmly away? Did another vehicle wait nearby? Did he remove blood-stained clothing before dawn? Did he stop for coffee hours later, blending effortlessly among ordinary customers, beginning another day? The historical record offers no answers. Only possibilities. Somewhere, perhaps only minutes after leaving the murder scene, the unknown man, who had occupied the rear seat of Ray Davis's taxi, ceased being a passenger and became one of America's most enduring unidentified killers. He carried no visible mark announcing what had happened. No witness pointed toward him. No alarm sounded as he vanished into anonymity. The city slept peacefully, unaware that a murder had already been committed within its boundaries. In homes across Oceanside, clocks moved steadily toward midnight. Families turned off bedroom lights. Business owners locked their doors. Police officers continued routine patrols without realizing that one of the community's taxi drivers would never answer another radio call. The ocean remained unchanged. Waves continued washing against the shore, as though nothing extraordinary had occurred. Nature often displays an unsettling indifference to human tragedy. Morning would eventually arrive. Sunlight would reveal what darkness had concealed. Investigators would begin asking questions that no one could answer. A city would lose its sense of security. And somewhere beyond the reach of every patrol car, every detective, and every future forensic examination, the man responsible would begin the rest of his life carrying a secret that, more than 60 years later, has never been fully uncovered. The final ride of Ray Davis had lasted only a matter of minutes. Its consequences would endure for generations. Dawn arrived quietly over Oceanside on April 11, 1962. The first rays of sunlight crept across the Pacific Ocean, turning the surface of the water into a sheet of shimmering silver. Seagulls circled above the shoreline, their cries carried inland by the cool morning breeze. Along the beaches, the tide continued its slow retreat, erasing footprints left in the sand during the night. It was the kind of peaceful morning that usually promised another uneventful day in the small coastal city. Nothing in nature reflected the violence that had unfolded only hours earlier. People began waking according to their familiar routines. Coffee percolated in kitchens. Newspapers landed on front porches with soft thuds. Shop owners unlocked their doors. Military personnel prepared for another day at Camp Pendleton. Parents hurried children through breakfast before school. Life moved forward with quiet certainty. But somewhere near the exclusive beachfront community of St. Malo, that illusion was about to shatter. A patrol officer driving through the area noticed something that did not belong. At first glance, it was simply another parked taxi. There was nothing dramatic about the vehicle from a distance. Cars were not uncommon along nearby roads, and a lone cab sitting in the early morning light did not immediately suggest tragedy. Yet something about its position seemed wrong. It appeared abandoned, almost unnaturally still. The officer slowed, curiosity replacing routine. Years of patrol work had taught him to trust small instincts. Often they led nowhere. Occasionally they changed everything. As the officer stepped closer, the silence surrounding the cab became almost oppressive. There was no driver climbing out to stretch his legs. No passenger gathering belongings before walking away. The engine was no longer carrying the familiar vibration of a working taxi. Everything felt frozen. Then he saw the man inside. Ray Davis was motionless. There are moments in police work that remain permanently etched into memory regardless of how many years pass afterward. Officers who spend entire careers investigating crime often remember not only what they saw, but the smell of the air, the angle of the sunlight, the sound of distant traffic, and the overwhelming realization that another human life has just ended. This was one of those moments. The officer immediately recognized that this was no medical emergency. This was a homicide. The radio crackled to life as assistance was requested. Within minutes, additional officers began arriving. Patrol cars gathered near the scene, their presence quietly transforming an isolated stretch of road into the center of the largest criminal investigation Oceanside had faced in years. Detectives followed soon afterward. So did photographers, crime scene technicians, supervisors, every available resource the department could assemble. The peaceful rhythm of the morning disappeared beneath the organized urgency that accompanies violent death. Investigators approached cautiously, determined to preserve every possible piece of evidence. In 1962, forensic science lacked many of the sophisticated tools available today, making careful observation even more important. Every footprint, every fingerprint, every shell casing had to be protected from contamination. Once disturbed, crucial evidence could disappear forever. The taxi itself became the first witness. Its doors, its windows, its seats, its steering wheel. Every surface carried the possibility of answering questions the victim no longer could. Inside, detectives immediately recognized several disturbing details. Ray had suffered 2 gunshot wounds. The first bullet had entered from behind, passing through the driver's seat before striking him. The trajectory strongly suggested that the attack began while he remained seated behind the steering wheel, still facing the road ahead. There were no indications that he had seen the weapon coming. The second wound told an even darker story. A close-range shot to the head. Not accidental. Not reckless. Deliberate. Whoever fired that second round wanted absolute certainty that the victim would never survive. Experienced investigators understood what that often meant. Execution. Not panic. Not self-defense. Not a struggle that had spiraled out of control. The killer had taken time to finish what had begun. That realization immediately influenced the direction of the investigation. Then detectives looked for the obvious signs of robbery. They checked Ray's pockets. His wallet remained. Cash was still inside. His wristwatch had not been removed. Personal belongings appeared undisturbed. Nothing suggested anyone had searched his clothing after death. That single observation eliminated what initially seemed the most likely explanation. Taxi drivers had occasionally been robbed before. Late-night fares created opportunities for criminals seeking easy money. Yet robberies almost always shared recognizable characteristics. Cash disappeared. Valuables vanished. The vehicle itself might even be stolen to delay identification. None of those things had happened here. The killer had left behind everything worth stealing. The message was unmistakable. Money had never been the objective. As crime scene photographers documented every angle of the cab, investigators began expanding their search beyond the vehicle itself. The surrounding ground received equal attention. Every footprint became significant. Every tire mark deserved examination. Detectives carefully searched nearby vegetation for discarded evidence. A shell casing. A dropped cigarette. A piece of fabric. Anything capable of connecting an unknown suspect to the crime scene. Among the physical evidence collected were fingerprints, shoe impressions, spent cartridge cases, and the taxi itself, now transformed from an ordinary work vehicle into the central piece of forensic evidence. At the time, each discovery inspired cautious optimism. Fingerprints solved crimes. Ballistics linked weapons. Footprints identified suspects. Investigators believed science might provide answers where witnesses could not. Unfortunately, 1962 imposed severe limitations. Fingerprint identification depended almost entirely upon manual comparison. There were no computerized databases capable of instantly searching millions of records. Detectives could only compare prints against suspects already known to law enforcement, or those arrested during the investigation. If the killer had never been fingerprinted, or if he lived in another jurisdiction, those prints might remain unidentified indefinitely. The same limitations affected ballistic evidence. The recovered cartridge cases could reveal the caliber of the weapon and certain mechanical characteristics unique to the firearm that fired them. But unless investigators recovered the actual gun, or linked it to another known crime, the evidence could identify only the type of weapon, not its owner. Science had reached its limits remarkably quickly. The investigators had evidence. What they lacked was someone to connect it to. Meanwhile, another troubling question emerged. Where exactly had the shooting occurred? Although Ray's body was discovered near St. Malo, the available evidence suggested the events had unfolded over more than one location. The taxi itself was later found elsewhere, bearing additional damage, including a bullet hole through the windshield. That discovery complicated the timeline considerably. Did the first shot occur while the cab was moving? Had the killer forced Ray to drive after the initial attack? Was the vehicle relocated after the murder? Or had every event taken place within a rapidly unfolding sequence during those final minutes? Each possibility carried different implications about the killer's behavior. Detectives reconstructed the route repeatedly. Maps covered conference tables. Distances were measured. Driving times calculated. Every turn between Mission Avenue and South Oceanside received renewed attention. Yet one critical element remained missing. The passenger. Without knowing who occupied the rear seat, every reconstruction contained an empty space where certainty should have been. Investigators appealed to the public for assistance. Had anyone seen Ray's taxi that night? Had anyone noticed a lone pedestrian leaving the St. Malo area after midnight? Did any residents hear gunshots? The response proved frustrating. Very few witnesses came forward. The neighborhood remained remarkably quiet during the relevant hours. If someone had heard gunfire, many may have dismissed it as something else. In coastal communities near military installations, occasional loud noises were not entirely unusual. A distant engine backfiring or training activity could easily blur together in memory, especially during the middle of the night. The killer had either chosen the location with extraordinary care or benefited from remarkable luck. As investigators worked through the morning, another realization slowly settled over the department. The anonymous telephone call received 2 days earlier could no longer be ignored. Before Ray's murder, it had sounded like a prank. Now it sounded like a warning. The calm male voice had claimed that something would happen in Oceanside which police would never solve. At the time, there had been no specific threat. No named victim. No location. No date. Just quiet confidence. Now, standing beside a murdered taxi driver whose killer had vanished without a trace, detectives began asking themselves an uncomfortable question. Had they unknowingly spoken with the murderer before the crime even occurred? If so, what had they missed? Could something in the caller's voice have revealed his age? His accent? His emotional state? The recording technology available to small police departments in 1962 was limited. Telephone calls were not routinely preserved for future analysis. Voice comparison science remained in its infancy. The call existed only in memory. Another potential piece of evidence had slipped away before anyone realized its importance. Throughout the day, newspaper reporters gathered outside police headquarters seeking information. Word of the homicide spread rapidly through Oceanside. Residents who had awakened expecting another ordinary Wednesday instead found themselves discussing murder over breakfast tables and office counters. Questions multiplied faster than answers. Who was the victim? Why had he been killed? Was the murderer still nearby? Could it happen again? Parents worried. Business owners whispered. Taxi drivers exchanged uneasy conversations at cab stands throughout the city. Many of them had known Ray personally. Now they imagined themselves sitting behind the same steering wheel, accepting the same anonymous fare, driving down the same dark streets. The difference between life and death suddenly seemed terrifyingly small. Inside police headquarters, detectives pinned photographs, maps, and handwritten notes across investigation boards. Each piece of evidence represented hope. Yet by the end of that first day, hope remained fragile. They possessed no identified suspect. No confirmed eyewitness. No clear motive. Only a murdered taxi driver, a mysterious passenger, who had disappeared into the night, and the growing realization that someone capable of planning such a calculated crime was still free. The investigation had only begun. Already, it was becoming painfully clear that this would not be an ordinary homicide. It would become something far more elusive. A mystery that refused to reveal its face, even while standing in plain sight. The first 72 hours after a homicide are often the most critical. Detectives know that memories are freshest, witnesses are most likely to come forward, and suspects have had the least amount of time to disappear or destroy evidence. Every passing hour slowly works against an investigation. Faces become harder to remember. Alibis become easier to manufacture. Physical evidence begins to deteriorate. The clock, invisible but relentless, becomes another adversary. For the investigators assigned to the murder of Ray Davis, those first days were filled with cautious determination. The crime scene had yielded physical evidence. The victim had been identified quickly. The final radio transmission established a rough timeline. There had even been that deeply unsettling anonymous telephone call made before the murder. At first glance, it seemed as though enough pieces existed to solve the case. The challenge was putting them together. Detectives began where every homicide investigation begins. The victim. Before identifying a killer, investigators must understand the person who died. Every relationship, every habit, every disagreement, every financial obligation becomes important. Sometimes the motive is hidden in the victim's everyday life rather than the crime scene itself. Ray Davis's family, friends, and co-workers were interviewed one after another. The conversations were methodical. Had Ray argued with anyone recently? Did he owe money? Was he involved in a romantic relationship that had turned hostile? Had he mentioned feeling threatened? Did he ever talk about difficult passengers, or frightening experiences while driving at night? Again and again, the answers pointed in the same direction. No. Co-workers described him as dependable and courteous. He was known for treating customers respectfully. He had no reputation for confrontation. Friends struggled to imagine anyone wanting to harm him. Family members could offer no explanation for why someone would deliberately target him. Instead of narrowing the suspect list, every interview seemed to eliminate another possibility. It became increasingly difficult to believe this had been a personal murder. Attention gradually shifted toward Ray's profession. Taxi drivers encounter hundreds of strangers every month. Unlike most occupations, their customers are rarely documented in detail. Names are forgotten almost as quickly as destinations. A passenger enters the vehicle, pays the fare, and disappears back into the city. That anonymity creates freedom. For honest people, it is convenient. For violent criminals, it can be the perfect disguise. Investigators contacted Checker Cab Company, hoping dispatch records might reveal useful information. Every available logbook was examined. Drivers were asked whether they remembered seeing anyone unusual near the taxi stand on Mission Avenue that evening. Someone behaving nervously. Someone lingering too long. Someone asking unusual questions. Nothing stood out. The passenger, who entered Ray's cab, had blended perfectly into the ordinary flow of nighttime activity. It was as though the city itself had swallowed him. Detectives then expanded the search beyond Ray's immediate circle. Known criminals living in or around Oceanside were reviewed carefully. Recent parolees. Repeat violent offenders. Individuals with histories of armed robbery. Anyone known to carry firearms. Officers knocked on doors throughout the region, conducting interviews that ranged from cooperative conversations to tense interrogations. Some suspects produced convincing alibis. Others were eliminated through physical evidence. A few attracted temporary interest before investigators ultimately concluded they had no connection to the crime. Every promising lead slowly dissolved. Military personnel stationed at nearby Camp Pendleton naturally became another focus. The base housed thousands of Marines, many of whom regularly visited Oceanside during evenings and weekends. The constant movement of service members through local businesses meant an unknown passenger could easily have been someone assigned to the installation. Military authorities cooperated with civilian investigators. Records were reviewed. Personnel were questioned where appropriate. Reports of disciplinary problems involving firearms received particular attention. Yet no convincing suspect emerged. The investigation continued expanding outward like circles spreading across still water. Former prisoners. Individuals with documented mental illness. People who had previously threatened taxi drivers. Known troublemakers from neighboring communities. Every category received careful examination. Still nothing. The absence of a clear motive became increasingly frustrating. Most homicide investigations eventually reveal emotional connections between victim and offender. A failed marriage. Financial conflict. Long-standing resentment. Business rivalry. The Ray Davis case refused to follow those familiar patterns. Each day without an arrest forced detectives toward a darker conclusion. Perhaps Ray himself had never mattered. Perhaps any taxi driver working that night would have become the victim. That possibility dramatically changed the psychological profile investigators began considering. If the victim had been selected randomly, then the killer likely viewed people differently from ordinary criminals. A robber sees opportunity. A jealous lover sees betrayal. A person seeking revenge sees a specific target. But someone willing to murder a stranger, without stealing anything, suggests another mindset entirely. Control. Power. The satisfaction of killing itself. Those concepts were less commonly discussed in 1962 than they would become decades later. Modern criminal profiling had not yet developed into a formal investigative discipline. The FBI's behavioral science unit did not yet exist in the form that would later revolutionize serial crime investigations. Detectives relied largely upon instinct and experience. Some quietly wondered whether they were searching for a man unlike anyone they had ever investigated before. Then another development changed the atmosphere completely. The telephone rang. Once again, an anonymous male voice spoke calmly to authorities. This time there was no prediction. There was a confession. The caller reminded police about the earlier warning before announcing that he had killed the taxi driver. His tone reportedly remained composed, almost conversational, lacking the panic one might expect from someone admitting murder. Then came another threat. The caller stated that he intended to kill a bus driver next. For a brief moment, the investigation transformed into something even more dangerous. Until then, detectives had been searching for a murderer who had already acted. Now they faced the possibility of preventing another killing. The significance of the call cannot be overstated. Several details mentioned by the caller had not yet been widely released to the public. That immediately strengthened investigators' belief that the speaker might genuinely be the killer rather than an attention-seeking imitator. Yet certainty remained impossible. False confessions sometimes accompany notorious crimes. Individuals seeking publicity occasionally insert themselves into investigations through fabricated claims. But the earlier warning call. That changed everything. The same voice had apparently contacted police before the murder occurred. Coincidence became difficult to accept. Inside police headquarters, urgency intensified. The threat against bus drivers forced law enforcement to expand its responsibilities beyond solving the existing homicide. Now they had to prevent another. The city reacted swiftly. Uniformed police officers began riding buses throughout Oceanside. Drivers who normally worked alone suddenly found armed protection sitting only a few feet away. Military police from Camp Pendleton assisted local authorities, increasing patrols and visible security measures. The objective was twofold: protect potential victims, and perhaps provoke the anonymous caller into making another mistake. The public sensed the growing anxiety immediately. Parents questioned whether children should ride public transportation. Bus drivers reported feeling unusually tense during every stop. Passengers studied unfamiliar faces more carefully than ever before. The simple act of boarding a bus acquired an unsettling edge of uncertainty. Anyone carrying a coat, despite the mild weather, suddenly appeared suspicious. Any passenger who remained silent too long attracted curious glances. Fear has a remarkable ability to transform ordinary behavior into perceived danger. Fortunately, the threatened attack never happened. Days passed. Then weeks. No bus driver was murdered. No additional shootings occurred. Whether the anonymous caller lost interest, achieved the desired psychological impact, or never intended to carry out the second threat remains unknown. Investigators were left with another unanswered question. Did they successfully prevent another homicide? Or had the threat itself always been part of the killer's performance? Meanwhile, forensic work continued. Fingerprints recovered from the taxi underwent painstaking comparison against available records. Each potential suspect required manual examination. Thousands of possibilities simply could not be searched efficiently using the technology available in 1962. The process demanded patience. Days became weeks. Weeks became months. No match. Ballistics experts examined the recovered cartridge cases in hopes of identifying the firearm. They could determine characteristics of the weapon, its caliber, certain microscopic markings left during firing. But without recovering the gun itself, or linking it to another known crime, those findings stopped frustratingly short of identifying the shooter. Shoe impressions found near the scene likewise failed to produce meaningful breakthroughs. Countless people owned similar footwear. Without a suspect for comparison, the impressions remained interesting, but ultimately inconclusive. One by one, the investigation's strongest leads reached dead ends. Detectives revisited witnesses, reviewed reports again, reconstructed timelines, returned to the crime scene. Sometimes solving a murder requires looking at familiar evidence from a different angle. Sometimes the missing detail has been waiting in plain sight all along. But the Ray Davis investigation resisted every effort. Months gradually turned into years. Personnel changed. Some detectives retired. Others transferred to different assignments. Fresh investigators inherited boxes filled with reports, photographs, maps, and handwritten notes from predecessors who had spent countless hours chasing shadows. Each new detective believed perhaps they would notice something overlooked before. Each eventually encountered the same obstacle: the unknown passenger. Without identifying the last person seen with Ray Davis alive, the investigation remained suspended between possibility and proof. The evidence suggested intelligence, planning, patience. The killer had selected an isolated location, Left behind almost no identifiable trail. Telephoned police with remarkable confidence. Then disappeared completely. Whether that disappearance resulted from extraordinary criminal sophistication or extraordinary luck remains one of the central questions surrounding the case. By the time the initial investigation lost momentum, Oceanside had changed. Life gradually returned to normal. Police officers no longer rode every bus. Residents resumed ordinary routines. New headlines replaced old ones. Yet inside filing cabinets at the police department, the Ray Davis case never truly closed. It simply grew colder. Waiting. For a witness who never came. For technology that did not yet exist. Or for one mistake by a killer who, for reasons still unknown, had managed to commit one of California's most chilling murders and then vanish so completely that more than 6 decades later, investigators are still searching for the man who climbed into the back seat of a taxi on Mission Avenue and was never positively identified again. For years, the investigation into Ray Davis's murder seemed destined to remain exactly where it had stalled. Inside aging filing cabinets, its photographs slowly fading, its reports yellowing with time, and its unanswered questions growing heavier with each passing decade. Detectives came and went. Police chiefs retired. Entire generations of Oceanside residents grew up knowing only fragments of the story. Some had heard that a taxi driver had once been murdered near the beach. Others vaguely remembered hearing about strange telephone calls. Few knew the details, and even fewer believed the mystery would ever be solved. Cold cases have a peculiar way of disappearing without ever truly being forgotten. They remain alive in quiet corners. Inside evidence lockers. Inside newspaper archives. Inside the memories of retired detectives, who still occasionally wonder whether they overlooked something important decades earlier. For the Davis investigation, the years became decades. The world changed dramatically around it. America entered the age of computers. The moon landing became history. DNA transformed criminal investigations. The internet connected information that had once been scattered across libraries and courthouse basements. Yet despite every technological leap, the identity of Ray Davis's killer remained unknown. Then something unexpected happened. The case attracted attention again. Not because someone suddenly confessed. Not because forgotten evidence appeared inside an attic. Not because a witness finally decided to speak. Instead, the renewed interest came from history itself. Researchers examining another infamous criminal case began noticing similarities that were difficult to ignore. Those similarities centered around one name that had fascinated investigators and terrified the public for decades. The Zodiac Killer. By the late 1960s, Northern California had become the hunting ground of one of America's most notorious unidentified murderers. The Zodiac Killer taunted police through letters, encrypted ciphers, and public threats. Newspapers eagerly published his messages. Television stations discussed his crimes almost daily. His ability to manipulate public fear became nearly as famous as the murders themselves. For decades, investigators attempted to understand when the Zodiac's killing spree had truly begun. The officially confirmed timeline started in the late 1960s. But some researchers wondered whether his violent career had actually begun much earlier. That question eventually brought attention back to Oceanside. At first, the similarities seemed almost coincidental. A taxi driver had been murdered. The victim had not been robbed. The killer had apparently contacted police. Then came another threatening telephone call. None of those elements alone proved anything. Together, however, they painted an unsettling picture. Researchers began laying the two timelines beside one another. The comparison became increasingly intriguing. The Zodiac Killer demonstrated a fascination with communicating directly with law enforcement. He enjoyed proving that police could not stop him. He often appeared less interested in personal motives than in psychological domination. Creating fear seemed almost as important as committing murder itself. The anonymous caller in the Ray Davis case displayed remarkably similar behavior. Before the murder, he announced that something would happen which police would never solve. After the murder, he calmly claimed responsibility. Then he threatened another victim. It was not merely homicide. It was performance. The parallels did not end there. One of the Zodiac Killer's most infamous confirmed victims was taxi driver Paul Stine, murdered in San Francisco in October 1969. Like Ray Davis, Stine was working a routine shift. Like Ray Davis, he accepted an apparently ordinary passenger. Like Ray Davis, he was shot inside his cab. Like Ray Davis, robbery was not considered the primary motive. To researchers studying criminal behavior, these similarities demanded attention. Could the same offender have attacked taxi drivers 7 years apart? Could Oceanside represent the first chapter of a story that would later unfold across Northern California? The theory possessed undeniable dramatic appeal. Yet serious investigators understood that appealing theories require evidence. And evidence remained frustratingly scarce. No confirmed fingerprint linked the two cases. No verified ballistic connection existed. No authenticated Zodiac letter explicitly claimed responsibility for Ray Davis's murder. No forensic breakthrough bridged the geographical and chronological gap separating Oceanside from the later Zodiac attacks. In criminal investigations, similarities create hypotheses. They do not create proof. Nevertheless, the renewed interest accomplished something extremely important. It rescued the Ray Davis case from obscurity. Journalists revisited old newspaper archives. True crime researchers interviewed retired investigators. Local historians reconstructed forgotten timelines. Among the individuals helping renew attention to the murder were researchers who carefully examined historical records from Oceanside between approximately 2017 and 2020. Their work highlighted details that many people outside San Diego County had never encountered before. Suddenly, a murder that had nearly vanished from public memory became the subject of documentaries, podcasts, books, and online discussions. The question changed. It was no longer simply, who killed Ray Davis? Now another possibility entered the conversation. What if this was the beginning of something much larger? The Oceanside Police Department also benefited from technological advances unimaginable in 1962. Evidence preserved for decades could now undergo examination using modern forensic techniques. Fingerprints collected during the original investigation were reviewed again. Physical evidence stored carefully through the years received fresh attention. Advances in imaging technology allowed investigators to analyze details that earlier generations of detectives could only study through magnifying glasses and traditional photography. Hope returned cautiously. Cold cases across America had been solved using evidence once considered useless. Tiny biological samples invisible to investigators decades earlier had identified killers. Old fingerprints had found matches inside modern databases. Genetic genealogy had begun solving murders more than 50 years old. Perhaps Ray Davis's killer would eventually join that growing list. But optimism required patience. Authorities acknowledged that evidence had been re-examined using modern methods, yet no publicly announced breakthrough identified the murderer. That silence produced mixed reactions. Some observers interpreted it as disappointing news. Others viewed it differently. Police departments rarely reveal every detail of active cold case work. Investigations often continue quietly for years before reaching public attention. Whether detectives possess promising leads today remains largely unknown. While professionals concentrated on forensic evidence, amateur investigators explored another path. Behavior. What kind of individual telephones police before committing murder? What personality seeks recognition while simultaneously avoiding identification? Modern criminal psychology suggests several possibilities. Some offenders crave power more than publicity. Others enjoy manipulating investigators into chasing false leads. Certain killers derive satisfaction, not merely from violence itself, but from controlling the emotional reactions of entire communities. The anonymous caller certainly understood fear. Threatening a bus driver after murdering a taxi driver demonstrated strategic thinking. The target expanded beyond one victim. Every bus driver became anxious. Every passenger questioned personal safety. The psychological damage spread far beyond the original crime scene. Whether or not the caller was the Zodiac killer, he demonstrated an understanding of terror that extended beyond simple homicide. He weaponized uncertainty. Still, alternative theories refused to disappear. Some investigators cautioned against focusing too heavily on Zodiac comparisons. History offers countless examples of unrelated criminals displaying similar behaviors. Telephone threats were not unique. Taxi drivers had unfortunately become victims in other unsolved cases. Execution-style shootings occurred long before the Zodiac emerged. Coincidence, while uncomfortable, remains entirely possible. Another theory suggested an unidentified serial killer unrelated to Zodiac altogether. Perhaps someone committed several murders across different jurisdictions, without ever attracting widespread attention. Before computerized databases connected police agencies efficiently, crimes separated by counties or states often remained isolated investigations. Patterns easily escaped detection. If such a killer existed, Ray Davis may have been one victim among several that history never connected. Others proposed something simpler. Perhaps the murder truly was an isolated event. A mentally unstable passenger. A spontaneous act of violence. A single horrifying night followed by a lifetime of silence. Sometimes reality proves less elaborate than speculation. The difficulty lies in determining which explanation reflects the truth. Every theory contains unanswered questions. Every possibility leaves important gaps. That is the defining characteristic of enduring mysteries. The evidence points toward several roads, but refuses to reveal which one reaches the destination. Today, more than 6 decades after the murder, investigators and researchers continue walking those roads. Some pursue forensic science. Others analyze historical documents. Some compare behavioral patterns across unsolved crimes. Each approach seeks the same answer. Not merely because solving old murders satisfies curiosity, but because justice delayed is not necessarily justice denied. Every unsolved homicide represents unfinished work. Families deserve answers. Victims deserve names attached not only to their own stories, but also to those responsible for ending them. As the renewed examination of the Ray Davis case demonstrated, time does not always weaken an investigation. Sometimes time strengthens it. Old assumptions are challenged. New technologies emerge. Fresh perspectives replace outdated conclusions. A file once considered hopeless can suddenly become solvable. Whether that day will ever arrive for Ray Davis remains uncertain. Yet one thing became undeniably clear during the renewed interest surrounding the case. The murder of a quiet taxi driver in Oceanside was no longer just a forgotten local tragedy. It had become one of the most fascinating unresolved mysteries in American true crime, a case standing at the intersection of history, psychology, forensic science, and one of the greatest unanswered questions of the 20th century. Somewhere, hidden among decades of evidence and silence, the truth still waits. Whether it belongs to the Zodiac Killer, to another unidentified serial murderer, or to a man whose name has never appeared in any investigation. Only the evidence, if it ever fully speaks, will decide. Unlike most true crime stories, the case of Ray Davis never reached the stage where a courtroom became the center of the drama. There was no dramatic arrest made at sunrise after months of surveillance. No suspect escorted in handcuffs before television cameras. No prosecutor standing before a jury with boxes of evidence. No defense attorney challenging eyewitness testimony. No emotional verdict read aloud beneath the seal of the state of California. Instead, the courtroom existed only as a possibility. A destination the investigation never managed to reach. That absence has become one of the most painful aspects of the Ray Davis case. Every homicide investigation is built around a single objective. Detectives collect evidence not simply to identify a suspect, but to present a case strong enough to survive inside a court of law. Suspicion alone cannot produce justice. The criminal justice system demands proof. Every fingerprint, every witness statement, every ballistic report, and every photograph must eventually answer the same question beyond a reasonable doubt. Who committed the crime? In the murder of Ray Davis, investigators gathered evidence that strongly suggested planning, deliberation, and intent. They recovered fingerprints. They documented bullet trajectories. They examined shell casings. They photographed the taxi from every angle. They reconstructed the victim's final route. They interviewed family members, co-workers, known criminals, military personnel, and anyone who might have crossed paths with the victim. Yet none of those efforts produced the one element required for prosecution: a defendant. Without an identified suspect, the legal process could move no further. The district attorney could not file charges against an unknown man. A judge could not issue warrants based upon speculation. A jury could not evaluate evidence without someone sitting at the defense table. Justice, in its formal legal sense, remained permanently suspended. That reality became increasingly frustrating as the years passed. Every major development in forensic science seemed to promise new hope. When computerized fingerprint databases emerged, investigators wondered whether preserved prints from the taxi might finally reveal a name. When DNA technology revolutionized homicide investigations during the 1980s and 1990s, many believed countless cold cases would soon be solved. Later, genetic genealogy identified suspects in crimes that had remained mysteries for half a century. Each breakthrough encouraged another review of the Ray Davis evidence. Could modern science succeed where earlier investigators had failed? Authorities revisited preserved material whenever advancing technology justified another examination. Evidence once considered exhausted was studied again. Photographs were enhanced. Latent fingerprints received fresh analysis. Investigators explored every opportunity offered by contemporary forensic methods. Publicly, however, no announcement ever confirmed the identification of Ray Davis's killer. For the victim's family, the passage of time created its own unique burden. Most grieving families eventually reach certain milestones. A suspect is arrested. Charges are filed. Court proceedings begin. Evidence is presented. Witnesses testify. Questions receive answers, even painful ones. Finally, a verdict is delivered. Whether guilty or not guilty, the legal process provides structure to grief. It offers a beginning, a middle, and an end. The Davis family received none of those stages. Instead, they were forced to live inside uncertainty. Every new theory reopened old wounds. Every newspaper article revived unanswered questions. Every documentary discussing the Zodiac Killer inevitably brought Ray's name back into public conversation. Yet none of those discussions produced the certainty that only a successful prosecution could provide. The absence of a trial also affected investigators. Police officers often speak about the satisfaction of presenting years of work inside a courtroom. Detectives spend months, or even years assembling complex cases. Watching evidence carefully introduced before a jury validates thousands of hours spent conducting interviews, reviewing reports, and chasing difficult leads. In the Davis investigation, that opportunity never arrived. Some detectives undoubtedly retired carrying unanswered questions with them. Others passed away without ever learning whether the unknown passenger had been identified elsewhere. Cold cases create unfinished careers as much as unfinished histories. One particularly fascinating aspect of the Davis case concerns how differently it might have unfolded under today's legal and investigative standards. Modern taxi services routinely maintain electronic records. Ride-sharing applications preserve customer identities. Cell phones generate location histories. Businesses operate beneath surveillance cameras. Traffic intersections increasingly record passing vehicles. Digital payments create financial trails. In 1962, none of those systems existed. The final passenger entered Ray's taxi almost anonymously. No electronic record documented the customer's identity. No security camera captured the pickup. No GPS traced the vehicle's movements. The investigation depended almost entirely upon human observation. When no reliable witness emerged, the trail effectively disappeared. Even if investigators had identified a promising suspect, prosecutors would still have faced enormous challenges. Criminal trials require admissible evidence. Defense attorneys question every assumption. Witnesses undergo cross-examination. Jurors must separate possibility from certainty. Theories connecting the Ray Davis murder to the Zodiac Killer, however intriguing, would almost certainly face intense scrutiny inside any courtroom. Similarity alone does not establish guilt. Behavioral patterns can suggest investigative directions. They cannot replace physical proof. Imagine, for a moment, what such a trial might require. A prosecutor would stand before 12 jurors describing 2 anonymous telephone calls. The first predicting an unsolved crime. The second claiming responsibility. Then the prosecutor would explain the murder itself. A hard-working taxi driver. No robbery. 2 carefully placed gunshots. An unidentified passenger. Years later, comparisons to the Zodiac murders would inevitably enter discussion if legally relevant. The defense would immediately challenge every inference. Where is the murder weapon? Where is the eyewitness? Where is the definitive forensic match? Can anyone prove beyond reasonable doubt that the anonymous caller and the killer were the same individual? Can anyone even identify the passenger who entered the taxi that night? Those questions illustrate why investigators remained so cautious. In criminal law, unanswered questions frequently become reasonable doubt. And reasonable doubt prevents conviction. The American justice system deliberately places that burden upon prosecutors, because the consequences of convicting the wrong person are irreversible. In many famous cold cases, public opinion eventually settles upon a likely suspect despite the absence of formal charges. The Ray Davis investigation has resisted even that outcome. Researchers disagree. Some strongly favor the Zodiac theory. Others reject it entirely. Some argue for an unidentified serial killer. Others believe the murder resulted from an isolated encounter that history simply failed to explain. Without definitive evidence, every conclusion remains provisional. That uncertainty preserves the legal presumption of innocence for every living individual who has ever been mentioned in connection with the case. It also protects the integrity of the investigation itself. Law enforcement agencies understand that public speculation can easily outpace factual evidence. Announcing premature conclusions risks contaminating future investigations, influencing witnesses, or unfairly accusing innocent people. For that reason, official statements regarding the Davis case have remained measured. The murder is recognized as an active cold case. Evidence continues to exist. Periodic reviews have occurred. No confirmed suspect has been publicly identified. That careful language reflects the responsibilities carried by professional investigators. Justice requires patience as much as determination. Sometimes, however, justice also depends upon circumstances entirely beyond human control. Witnesses die. Evidence deteriorates. Memories fade. Documents disappear. Every year that passes makes prosecution more difficult, even if the killer were identified tomorrow. Yet history has repeatedly demonstrated that impossible cases sometimes become solvable when least expected. Across the United States, individuals have been arrested in their 70s and 80s for murders committed decades earlier. Jurors have convicted offenders based upon evidence strengthened, not weakened, by advancing forensic science. Those examples continue offering hope. Hope to investigators. Hope to surviving family members. Hope that one day the courtroom denied to Ray Davis for so many years may finally become reality. If that day ever comes, the trial will not simply concern a murder committed in April 1962. It will represent the conclusion of one of California's longest and most haunting criminal investigations. Until then, the courtroom remains empty. The judge's bench remains silent. The witness stand waits. The jury box sits vacant. And somewhere beyond the reach of every legal proceeding, the person responsible for ending Ray Davis's life remains unidentified, leaving justice suspended between the evidence that exists and the proof still missing. When a murder remains unsolved for weeks, people describe it as an active investigation. When it remains unsolved for months, it becomes a difficult case. When years pass without an arrest, newspapers begin calling it a cold case. But when more than 6 decades slip by and the questions remain exactly where they began, the crime becomes something larger than an investigation. It becomes part of history. That is what happened to the murder of Ray Davis. The case slowly drifted beyond the boundaries of ordinary police work and entered the collective memory of California. It became one of those stories quietly passed from one generation of detectives to the next, a file that every new investigator recognized by name long before reading the reports inside. It represented not only a single act of violence, but also the uncomfortable reminder that even the most determined investigations sometimes fail to reach certainty. For Oceanside, the murder marked the end of an era. Before April 1962, many residents believed violent crime belonged somewhere else. Large cities experienced murders. Organized crime flourished in distant places. Newspapers carried stories about violence happening hundreds of miles away, but Oceanside remained the kind of town where people still trusted unfamiliar faces. That confidence never fully returned. The murder of a taxi driver may seem, on paper, like an isolated tragedy affecting only one victim and his family. In reality, crimes of random violence ripple outward in ways impossible to measure. Taxi drivers changed the way they approached passengers. Bus drivers spent months looking into mirrors more often than usual. Police officers became more cautious when anonymous threats reached dispatchers. Parents looked at strangers differently. Fear has a remarkable ability to survive long after danger itself has disappeared. The anonymous telephone calls contributed to that lasting fear. Without those calls, the Davis murder would still have been a shocking crime. But the caller transformed it into something psychologically different. The killer, or someone claiming to be the killer, wanted more than one victim. He wanted an audience. He wanted police officers to remember his voice. He wanted ordinary citizens to imagine another attack. He wanted uncertainty to spread through the community. In that sense, whether intentionally or not, he succeeded. Long after the gunshots faded into history, the questions remained alive. Who made those calls? Were they truly the murderer? If so, why warn police beforehand? Why confess afterward? Why threaten a bus driver only to disappear without carrying out the promise? Every unanswered question became another reason the case refused to fade. For Ray Davis's family, however, the mystery carried a far more personal weight. Public fascination often focuses on the unknown killer. Families remember the person who never came home. Somewhere, people who loved Ray were forced to continue living while knowing that his final moments would probably never be fully understood. Birthdays arrived. Holidays passed. Family gatherings continued with one chair permanently empty. Conversations occasionally returned to the same painful subject. Had the killer ever been identified? Was there any new information? Could this finally be the year investigators found the truth? Most families of homicide victims eventually receive answers they never wanted. They learn exactly who committed the crime. They hear the motive. They attend trials. They listen to verdicts. The Davis family instead inherited silence. That silence lasted not months or years, but generations. Children became adults. Adults became grandparents. Some relatives undoubtedly passed away before ever seeing meaningful progress in the investigation. Time, often described as a healer, behaves differently in unsolved murders. It softens grief. It does not erase questions. Meanwhile, the case developed an entirely different life within the world of criminal investigation. Detectives studying unsolved homicides frequently returned to the Davis file, because it represented an unusual combination of circumstances. There was apparent planning. There was physical evidence. There were anonymous communications before and after the murder. Yet despite these seemingly valuable investigative advantages, the offender remained unidentified. The case became a lesson. It reminded investigators that evidence alone does not solve crimes. Evidence must connect to a person. Without that connection, fingerprints remain patterns. Shell casings remain pieces of metal. Photographs remain images frozen in time. Every clue waits for someone capable of explaining it. Advances in forensic science have transformed countless investigations once considered hopeless. DNA has solved murders committed before many current detectives were born. Genetic genealogy has identified offenders who believed they had escaped forever. Digital reconstruction has clarified evidence once dismissed as unusable. Each scientific breakthrough encourages renewed optimism for cases like Ray Davis. But optimism must always coexist with realism. Not every cold case can be solved. Evidence may simply be too limited. Biological material may never have existed. Critical mistakes made unknowingly during the original investigation may no longer be reversible. The passage of time is both friend and enemy. Technology improves. Memory declines. Somewhere within that balance lies the future of the Davis investigation. Another fascinating aspect of the case concerns its place within American true crime culture. Theories surrounding the Zodiac Killer have introduced Ray Davis's name to audiences far beyond Southern California. Countless articles, documentaries, podcasts, and online discussions revisit the similarities between the Oceanside murder and later Zodiac crimes. These comparisons have undoubtedly preserved public interest. They have also created an important responsibility. Responsible investigation requires separating possibility from fact. The similarities are real. Both cases involve taxi drivers. Both involve seemingly motiveless violence. Both feature communication directed toward law enforcement. Those observations deserve serious examination. Yet they remain observations. No official forensic evidence has publicly confirmed that Ray Davis was a Zodiac victim. That distinction matters. True crime often exists at the intersection of storytelling and evidence. The most compelling narrative is not always the correct one. As researchers continue examining historical records, they must resist the temptation to force evidence into attractive theories. The truth deserves patience. Even when patience feels unsatisfying. Perhaps the most haunting element of the Ray Davis case is how ordinary everything appeared before it happened. There were no warning signs visible to the victim. No escalating conflict. No public threats directed specifically toward him. He simply reported for work. Accepted another fare. Spoke calmly into his radio. Then disappeared into history. That sequence reminds us of something deeply unsettling about random violence. Sometimes extraordinary tragedies emerge from completely ordinary moments. A person leaves home expecting another routine day. A stranger enters the picture. Within minutes, countless futures change forever. The victim loses everything. The family loses certainty. The community loses innocence. Investigators begin asking questions that may never receive answers. And somewhere, the offender continues living with knowledge unavailable to anyone else. If the killer survived into old age, he may have carried that secret through every ordinary chapter of life. Perhaps he held steady employment. Raised children. Attended family celebrations. Retired peacefully. Maybe neighbors described him as polite. Reliable. Quiet. History has repeatedly shown that terrible crimes are not always committed by people who outwardly appear monstrous. Sometimes evil wears an ordinary face. Sometimes it waits patiently behind everyday routines. Sometimes it dies before anyone learns its name. That possibility gives cold cases their unique emotional weight. Unlike solved crimes, they never truly conclude. Every anniversary reopens them. Every technological advance offers renewed hope. Every new generation of investigators inherits the same unanswered questions. For Ray Davis, justice remains unfinished. His name continues appearing in police records, historical research, and discussions surrounding one of America's greatest criminal mysteries, not because investigators have failed to care, but because the truth has remained astonishingly difficult to reach. More than 60 years have passed since a taxi left Mission Avenue carrying one unidentified passenger. The streets have changed. Businesses have come and gone. The city has grown far beyond its 1962 boundaries. Modern vehicles now travel roads that barely resemble those Ray Davis once drove. Yet one invisible journey remains incomplete. It began with an ordinary fare. It ended beside the Pacific Ocean. And it continues today inside evidence lockers, investigative files, and the minds of everyone who refuses to accept that some questions should remain unanswered forever. Perhaps one day, science will finally reveal the identity hidden behind those anonymous telephone calls. Perhaps a forgotten document will emerge. Perhaps a family member of the killer will discover something overlooked for decades. Or perhaps the mystery will remain exactly as it is now, one of California's oldest unsolved homicides, suspended permanently between history and justice. Until that answer arrives, the story of Ray Davis serves as more than a tale of one tragic night. It is a reminder that every cold case represents a promise still waiting to be kept. A promise that somewhere, somehow, the truth still matters.